This is Steve Cochran. Welcome once again to the highest rated podcast that emanates from this office, live from my office. It's the name of the podcast. I'm glad you're here, whether you're a regular or a first-timer. Let's talk to you first-timers for a second. Checking it out, are you? Giving a little sniff around, huh? See, it's got that new podcast smell because we haven't been at it that long. But I'm glad you're here, and I want you to hit a subscribe, like, or follow button on any platform. There's going to be something like that guarantees you that you're going to get every episode of Live from My Office delivered directly to you. If you're confused about how you got here, maybe it was an accident, maybe it was a twist of fate, ask someone you love or someone you like, or maybe just a nerd in the corner, how to download a podcast and how to subscribe, and they're going to get it done for you. Because people want to help people get podcasts. I think if there's any lesson that we learned as youngsters, it was that. I feel like me and you grew up in the late 60s and 70s. Remember when the teacher would take you aside and talk about the lessons of podcasts? I do. So, again, thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. Thank you to David Hochberg and Team Hochberg at 855-56-DAVID or 56david.com for being the title sponsor of Live from My Office. All right, look, the news. It used to be so easy. 3 channels, Cronkite, radio, newspapers in every town, report the facts, just the facts, and do it fairly. Then Nightline comes along. Cable TV, CNN, 24-hour news. Nobody believed it would work. And then Fox News and MSNBC. There was a couple of waves of the internet. Here's a memo to the 90s. Turns out that wasn't a fad. And the problems of social media. Truth becomes just an option. And there was and is still a man named Donald Trump. Rick Kaplan has been there for it all. Every major news story for the last 50 years and working the front lines with the biggest names in news, including Walter Cronkite, Peter Jennings, Ted Koppel, Diane Sawyer, Katie Couric, Christiane Amanpour, and of course he ran CNN and MSNBC. But he's not done yet. If you understand the importance of legitimate news, you understand what a privilege it is to welcome back my friend Rick Kaplan to Live from My Office. He'll join us next as Live from My Office continues. Thank you for listening. Are you purchasing a home and tired of getting your offers declined? You need to do what I did. I called Team Hochberg, my sister, my daughter, my son, my daughter-in-law. Look, if it's good enough for my family, you know I'm recommending it to you. Team Hochberg. They're always looking out for your financial best interest. Tom wanted to buy a home before selling his current home, but he didn't qualify. Tom's grandmother, Sharon, didn't want him to lose the home, so she gave him a $400,000 personal loan. Thank you, Granny. A banker told Tom he'd have to wait 6 months to secure a mortgage to pay back his grandma, Sharon. That's not true. Sharon didn't want to wait 6 months, so she called Team Hochberg for a free consultation. Team Hochberg helped Tom secure a delayed finance mortgage so he could pay Grandma back immediately upon the sale of the current home. To learn more about how your family could benefit from delayed financing and help you in the process, the little risk to the family member here issuing the short-term loan, by the way, call Team Hochberg at 855-56-DAVID or go to 56david.com. That's 855-563-2843. or 56david.com. Homeside Financial is an equal housing lender, NMLS number 1124061. There's nobody, in my opinion, that's traveled the path that Rick Kaplan has traveled, from producing the most influential newsman ever in Walter Cronkite to every well-known, successful, great anchor and cross paths with all the great reporters of a generation plus. And by the way, he ran CNN and MSNBC. It's my friend, an actual true journalist who has a passion for journalism and can talk about it, and that's why he's here. Rick Kaplan. Hi, Rick.
Hi there. That's very sweet of you to say all that.
Well, I appreciate you doing this. And let me jump right in.
Usually at the end of a litany like that, they go, and we'll remember him all.
Are you offering me a eulogy spot? Because I think you're a little early for that.
No, I know. People are lining up, though. But there's a lot of people I think would like to do a eulogy for him. No, I'm teasing.
As you know, there's a fine line between a eulogy and a roast, so you got to be careful.
That's exactly right.
All right, let me jump in with something topical here, and I want to hit you with some broader questions as well. But Governor Cuomo has given essentially what amounts to 2 weeks' notice before he leaves. His lieutenant governor will take over in New York because it's New York State, because he comes from royalty when it comes to political families. It's a big, big story. Is it overblown because of the proximity, the networks are in New York, or is it legitimately covered to be the huge story that it is?
It is the huge story because it's not that he's from New York. It's that he's a governor and he stepped way over the line.
How do you?
Fortunately, that doesn't happen a lot.
Yeah, and Elliot Spitzer, of course, is a bit of a different path, but it wasn't that long ago where he stepped aside. Were you surprised when you heard the news?
No. When the report came out and he'd lost all the support he had in his own party, it was done. It was just a matter of when was he going to see the light. You know, it's tough for these guys because he's won 3 elections to governor. If he'd ran a 4th time without any trouble, he probably would have been reelected yet again. And all of a sudden, they're coming to him saying, you got to leave, you know, and he's probably disbelieving of it because you get these guys, they get a certain omnipotence, a feeling of that, and they just don't think it can happen to them, or they'll find a way out, or someone will save them in the 11th hour, but there was no saving him.
Is he, and we don't have all the facts in front of us. I know you've seen the report. I've seen the report that led to all this, and certainly a number of women are speaking.
And the report is very detailed.
It is.
So, you know, I'm sure there are tons of facts we don't know about, but what we do know is enough to impeach him.
Yeah, and that's the political process that doesn't exist in the corporate world, but I would dare say that you and I both know men of our age range who also think they play by different rules. Is it not our responsibility now to understand that it's not Mad Men in the 60s and the game is over?
I think anybody who doesn't get that is in an important job is playing above his weight. I mean, if you don't know that you can't get away with this shit anymore, then you've been living in a cave.
How do you do a balanced reporting of a story like this when he is a polarizing figure to begin with, and this is clearly offensive to half your audience, plus hopefully the majority of the male side as well?
Well, it ought to be appalling to a majority of the total audience, no matter who you're measuring.
Right.
It's outrageous, but you know, if truth be told, we all knew that he was not a nice guy, not a good guy, and didn't know this, but we knew what he was. And it's not, you know, I'm surprised that he was, considering his ties to the Me Too movement and how outspoken he was on women's rights and all, to have so many people come out with such detail, and the transgressions are so extraordinary and so over the line. It's just hard to you know, and I saw somebody do it with a timeline, you know, what he was doing, you know, with the Me Too movement, and the next day is when the state trooper said that he, you know, abused her. So it's a guy who, you know, just thought he could get away with anything.
There was a story that Brian Stelter reported this weekend on his media coverage program, Reliable Sources on CNN, that he does on Sundays, about a reporter in Albany, or actually the guy that runs the paper in Albany, and I'm sorry I don't have his name in front of me, who got a vicious phone call from the governor's team about how the story was being covered. I know you've gotten calls like that from politicians, and your people have through the years. What is that process like? Because now you've got people in positions who don't have your experience and your ability to stand up to that stuff. Does political pressure work?
Well, political pressure, if it has some right behind it, certainly will work on some. But, you know, this is very over the line. This is not a close call.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're going to go get, they say if you take a shot at the king, you better hit him. The fact of the matter is, he is so far over the line that I don't think it's hard to hold to hold the line, no matter what. Because what can his supporters say that's going to make me feel like, oh my God, am I going out on a limb, and it's going to get sawed off, on the wrong end. And you're not worried about that. You're really not worried about making an error here, because there's, you'd have to have so many people lying. And
right.
There's also our own experience with the governor, not necessarily in terms of sexual harassment, but just harassment.
Mm-hmm. I
mean, he was not the nicest guy. The harder calls are what CNN and what Chris Cuomo has the line that they have to walk.
Take me behind the scenes with that, because it's unique in that Chris Cuomo is the younger brother, and Andrew Cuomo, the governor, was on the show many times. He was very well thought of, generally speaking, in the public. During the early days of COVID, his daily briefing was sort of a must-watch event.
They started talking about him being a vice presidential candidate.
Exactly.
And maybe even a presidential candidate one day. If you're CNN, first of all, if you're Chris, you know that you have to recuse yourself from the story, because if you report it positively, you get questioned, and that causes its own set of stories, and it reflects poorly on you. And if you report it negatively, that's just asking more than you should of somebody. These are situations where that's why the word recuse is in the dictionary, because it's clearly a case where Chris and, it turns out, the network had to recuse themselves in terms of Chris reporting on the story. He was not able to do that. It'll be interesting to see tonight and tomorrow and the next few days what Chris has to say, and if he cares to say anything about the story. I assume at some point he'll have to unload himself, and my bet is he'll defend his brother, but what his brother did is defenseless.
Well, and coincidentally, I believe he is off this week because he takes off his birthday week, and such is the timing. But what would your advice be to one of your A-line talents in a case like this, in saying anything about it or not saying anything?
Oh, I mean, if you're CNN, you got to cover it. If you're any other anchor, the only person off the hook is Chris,
mm-hmm.
and he's not off the hook. He just can't say anything.
But do you address that? Do you instruct them to address that? Does he say it at the top of the show? For obvious reasons, I am in agreement with CNN management to not discuss the story of my brother Andrew Cuomo. Or do you not address it at all?
Well, if Chris were doing the show on the day where the governor resigned, I would tell Chris to take the night off.
Mm-hmm.
And if he demanded, and he wouldn't demand, I think, to anchor that night, because there's no percentage in weighing in when it's a done deed. And I just think I would remind everybody on the staff that he's a governor, and he's not to be treated any differently than you would treat any other politician caught.
Was there a huge conflict of interest story like this that you had to deal with through the years?
I've never had anything quite like this. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've had stories where you had to be careful how you reported it. And what you have to do is take people who have a direct line on the story, you have to take them out of the line of decision makers. And you can't, what you don't want to do is muck things up worse. So you can't all of a sudden make how you covered it its own story. So you report it straight, and you don't pull any punches.
So let me go backwards for a second here, because I think it's important for people to know what politicians do try to do. I don't know that there's any upside for a politician from the LBJ days and before through today to pick up the phone and start screaming at a reporter or an editor or, an executive producer or somebody running a network. because you're going to get the last word, and you're
I've got more time than they have opportunity.
But that happens, right? That's a regular thing.
Sure. Yeah, politicians. And first of all, by the time you get to a decision-making level, people know if you have a price. People know if you have a weakness.
Mm-hmm.
People know how to get to you. And if you're somebody with a reputation that you can sway him or change him or whatever, that's really difficult to defend against. But what I think it's really kind of an easy call if you have if you have direct ties to the main players, and whatever you say can be misconstrued as either an unnatural defense or whatever. I think you have to take yourself out of the story and give it to another of your colleagues who doesn't have those questionable ties.
We'll talk more about Trump because we have to, because it's a pertinent issue, and how pertinent it is certainly arguable. But among the norms that were changed, shattered, or shut down was the right of coverage and the importance of coverage to the people. Is that a standard political threat? You go after my guy or my woman and you're not going to have access anymore?
Yeah, it is. Because if a politician loses his cool with you or decides, we're going to box him out of the story or her out of the story, they will for the way, for the harsh reporting that they did or the unpleasant reporting that they did, or the fact that, she or he didn't listen to reason or didn't consider all the facts. But it's pretty easy to see who buckled, who caved. It's easy to, when you analyze coverage, it's easy to see when somebody gilded the lily, and went easier than they should have. So much is known. That Attorney General's report is so clear that I don't think this is, it's a difficult story because of who's involved, but it's not a difficult story to get to the bottom of. And, this arguing factually, I say I didn't touch her. Well, there's 11 people plus who say you did touch them. And you can't do it in a court of law, that you can't bring in, other cases that, because it would bias a jury figuring out what you did in this case. But in the court of public opinion, you can bring in all the other cases because it's all about intent and probability, and people make up their own minds. And I don't think people are going to have trouble making up their mind about it. Plus, as I said, he wasn't a nice guy.
Right.
And people have seen his peak. And so it's clear that he wasn't a nice guy. And the only question is, does Chris do anything stupid that affects his career at this point?
It's maybe an unfair question to ask, but you certainly know him, and he is a shoot from the hip guy and an emotional guy. Who's his meter? Who helps him not do that?
I don't know. I'm sure that Jeff will have a talk with him, Zucker.
Mm-hmm.
And his colleagues will have a talk with him, and the senior staff on his show will have a talk with him. And if you're Jeff Zucker, Chris is an important player on your network, and you want to make sure he doesn't get any more damaged by the story than he already has been. And he's only damaged in that he's the brother of, there was nothing wrong with putting the governor on
mm-hmm.
Before. I mean, that's fine. I mean, God bless him.
Yep.
But it's what he does on this story that will matter, because it'll speak to his credibility going forward on other stories.
People in Cuomo's position, whether they be as extreme as Trump or what Cosby did, because it goes to the larger point you were making before, the idea that all of these women would have similar stories, women that don't know each other, who would suddenly be dragged through the mud for what they're saying, their truths. The predators in the world, and Cuomo, as far as I'm concerned, could be put in that category now as well. They all have the same playbook: trash the accusers on some level. It may have been less in the case of Cuomo than the others I mentioned, but that still is the way it goes.
I think Cuomo's been over the line in the way he went after all the people who had stories to tell. There's all those stories. I mean, it's kind of like the preponderance of evidence in this case it's not to the level of Bill Cosby, but it's it's there. There are a lot of people who said things that you have reason to believe because so many people said similar things. So he had a propensity towards behavior like this.
Jumping around here a little bit, but the Trump era stuff certainly changed the perception of news in a bad way, and there were a lot of good people that fought for it. I don't know how you feel about Jake Tapper's contribution at CNN. He was
I think Jake's great.
So
I'm a great fan of Jake.
So do I, and I think he's a great reporter and anchor, and I think he's figured out a way better than most, if not everybody I've seen, to be able to state his opinion within the realm of covering stories and still be a journalist. Is that a line that we understand because of what we do, or can the public wrap their head around that as well?
Well, Trump has gotten away with this fake news business, and because he's the one who kind of made it popular, and the media didn't have a good answer for it, and therefore fake news lives. I mean, at least in the language, and so it makes it harder when you just sit there and say, "Oh, fake news," and you lump all the people in together on that. I don't think that comes to play here.
No, I agree with that. But in the big picture, it's an ongoing battle about trust in the media. And how does the media get the trust back to the point where the coverage can serve its purpose of keeping an eye on the people in power?
Well, it's one story at a time. And I think, it's good to mention Jake because Jake, I think, keeps things honest. It isn't that, it's not that there isn't clearly a point of view here, but it's a point of view that Jake builds a case so that the point of view is kind of obvious. It would be strange for Jake to take a different point of view after building a case. And it's, there are some things that are just inevitable that come out. You report enough wrongdoing, and so you end up calling the guy a crook, but look at all the things you've shown that he stole. So of course he's a crook, or she's a crook. It's all what evidence is out there, and you have to make clear to point it out. But I don't go with the idea that it's not like this is about we report, you decide, Fox's line. I think there are certain inevitabilities that the facts come into play, and you just sit there and say, look, we've got too much that says he did what he's charged with, or she did what she's charged with. And if you're a decent anchor and you have built your own track record of honesty, and so that when, the evidence tilts to a certain way, you make clear that you're reacting to the evidence. You're listening to the science.
Sure, and that position is earned, right? It's earned through being the person who viewers have seen for a long time, who they can trust, who has delivered again and again and again, as opposed to a 2-year reporter or whoever it might be.
Precisely, but even in the course of a piece, it depends how a case is built. And I look at, I listen to the language when they build a case. And sometimes you sit there and you go, you can't say that. It might seem logical that that's the way the facts broke, but you don't have enough there to make those claims. So you can do it in the course of a piece, but it's certainly better if you have a track record, a history. Walter Cronkite had a history for honesty. Peter Jennings or Ted Koppel or Diane Sawyer, they have a history for it. Katie Couric, these people are very careful with their reputations because they know how valuable they are.
But that
there are other people who are there are people who are incapable of giving their opinion, and you don't trust those people anymore than the others, because you sit there and go, if something is clearly out there and you don't observe it, then you don't have the courage of your convictions.
Right. But that's the big difference now, or one of the big differences now, is that you need that ability to have a frontline person who has credibility, who can do both of those things. And that's not easy for talent, which I know you recognize, but it ain't just talking, folks.
No, it's not. And you have to pay close attention to the adjectives.
Give me an example of that.
Oh boy. I should have done more prep for this. But when they start reporting, and you sit there and go, how can you make that conclusion based on the evidence that you've just told us? You've just told us that something is leaning towards this, but you don't have enough here to cross the line. And it's a judgment call on every case. I could do it if you had some specifics.
Right.
But that's what you do. You sit down and you say to everybody, all right, look, once you get past, let's analyze the adjectives, let's analyze the verbs, and are we getting ahead of the story?
When it comes to the language of journalism, that's changed as well, and because there's a harshness to the way we talk to each other now.
And there's not, there is a coarseness, and I don't think the media does a particularly good job. They clearly had it out for Trump. I'm not saying he didn't deserve it, but if you're a journalist, that's not your job to have, to build opinions like that. But you just have to, you have to act on the conservative side. I don't mean as a political persuasion.
No, but take the high road.
Yeah, you really do. You have to be very careful. But now you're into your credibility. And so you want to be very careful before you call somebody out.
But having said that, one of my short fuses over the last several years has been when Trump, we're talking about human beings here. And when Trump can say about Jake Tapper, since we're talking about Jake, or other prominent anchors on MSNBC or even Fox, though he wouldn't have said it about Fox in almost all cases. But you say your job is shit, you're a liar, you've always been a liar, you're a terrible person, you're the enemy of the people. We are dealing with human beings, so isn't some of that emotional response understandable?
Well, the example you just pulled out is Trump showed a lack of self-control and a lack of editing when he would go after people he was angry at. Mm-hmm. And so, to me, his credibility was in the tank. And conversely, some of the reporters who reported on Trump, I don't know, somehow I think they thought it was their job to call him out and to be the chief arguer, the chief, truth teller. And that's not their job either. If you're a White House correspondent, you're here to hold people's feet to the fire and to tell people what happened. I didn't hire, I'm not watching you so that you can trash somebody.
Right.
So I think some of these correspondents, who maybe I even agree with, but they went over the line in the way they went after Trump.
How do you handle the language part of it again when it comes to lying? Because I started to tell you this and I got off track of myself, but the word falsehood is not strong enough to me. A lie is a lie. Yeah. And would you encourage talent to say it's a lie if it's a lie?
Yeah, I would. So when they talk about the big lie, that Trump really won the election and there was a great deal of fraud and vote stealing. Well, we know that's a lie.
Yep.
And there's no reason not to come out and say it. But you see, even though they say it, it doesn't have the impact that it ought to. When you say it, that impact ought to be enormous. And in past days, it would have been. But now, because I think they're careless with their language. A lot of these networks that hold themselves up to be the truth teller. And when looking at the left, that you're talking about Fox, and when you're looking at the right, you're talking about MS or CNN, and they have a tough job, the MS and CNN. And sometimes I think some of their correspondents go off the reservation a little.
What's the viewer's responsibility? Because is this the dumbing down of America or the numbing up of America, or is it both?
Well, a viewer has a responsibility to make wise choices when they listen to the different sides. And most of the problem comes when you only have one or two outlets and, for your information, and those outlets think the same way. I try to have a number of people trying to influence me. So I'll turn on Fox, I'll turn on MS, I'll turn on CNN, I'll read Politico. There's a lot of stuff I go, and then I kind of make my own mind up. But I'm a news nut, so I read a lot,
right,
and I listen to a lot. But if you want to have an informed opinion, you have to have a lot of inputs. And then there's certain people, like when Jake tells me something, I tend to believe it.
Right. But to get back to the viewer's perspective on this, how do regular folks who go out and they work all day, maybe they want to catch some primetime news, and they'll turn on one of the networks?
Well, that's the mistake right there. You can turn on one of the networks, but if you're going to build your opinion, you have to watch a few. So you sit there and go, look, I was greatly entertained by Colbert, but I know that he's going to, because he's a comedy show.
Yeah, it was a bit.
It's a bit, and it's not necessarily, it's not a bit with no backing or with no research, by no means. John Oliver is incredibly well researched.
Yep.
So you just know who you can believe in that regard.
But how do viewers know if they're watching opinion or news, especially if they're drawn to watch just one network? Is there a way to fight that game?
Not if you're only listening to one. If you only have one input, chances are that's the opinion you're going to have, or it'll lay the groundwork for everything they say I don't believe.
By the way, I don't want to leave the fake news piece of this completely, because to me, the argument was much simpler and should have been much more defensible. And there should have been a hardcore defense that went on after it. You know this better than anybody after running CNN and MSNBC. There's a floor, if not floors, of lawyers who are ready to defend the journalistic ethics of the people you hire to go out and cover and report on stories. This ain't the National Enquirer. You can say this out loud for me, but I'm pretty sure I'm right about this. You never called a writers' meeting to come in and make up stuff, did you? Ever?
No, never. Nobody does that.
Because because just break it down to money. There's a financial interest in this. You can't become CNN or MSNBC if you do that.
You can't even do it if you're Fox. I mean, they have a certain point of view, and everything reflects that point of view. And I've hired some of their anchors when they were not at Fox, and they've changed since they've gone to Fox. I guess they figured out how to make money and be successful, and so be damned with the truth.
Well, you've got the Tucker Carlsons of the world, and he is a TV character. He's not a journalist. I wouldn't even call him a talk show host. He's a brilliant young man. Yeah, I knew him. Listen, I knew him back when he worked for you. I knew him when he had the bow tie, and he listened to people and he talked to people. But man, he's taken on the wrestling thing now.
It's crazy, isn't it? I understand why Tucker is being the way he is, but I'm disappointed because he was not this way.
Yeah, and my barometer is I've got a couple of grandkids who I want to be able to have look at me with admiration and not skepticism about whether or not I'm telling them the truth. It's the same thing with the politicians, though it's a different game. You got to go home and you got to answer to your family. And I don't know how Tucker Carlson answers to his, other than the fact they got a really nice house.
Maybe they all agree.
Well, that's it, right?
Agree. Maybe they all drank the Kool-Aid together. But
but that's the thing. I don't believe he believes what he says.
I think I hope he doesn't. Let's put it that way. This whole business about vaccines, that really, this is what troubles me. The question about whether they're vaccine or not vaccine, there are personal attitudes about it, and you have to respect that. But there are people who, when they sit there and they tell lies about it, and in their own personal lives, they've gotten the vaccine. So you sit there and go, what a hypocrite you are. You're talking your viewers out of getting a vaccine that could save their life, and you've taken it. So what do you care, right?
It's outrageous.
Well, you're killing off your own viewer base, so what the heck? I just find it amazing. I find it amazing we've had so much trouble talking, especially now, young people into taking the vaccine. It's not brain surgery.
No, it's
you might get COVID anyways, but the case you'll get is proven to be far milder and way less fatal.
It's less than 1/100% that you'll get a breakthrough infection. It won't kill you, and it won't put you in a hospital. We know that because it hasn't. It's that simple. And when you look at the Florida story, where there's more kids in the hospital than anywhere else in the country.
Yeah, I find DeSantis's behavior is reprehensible.
Oh, it's awful. It's awful.
Yeah. And Abbott isn't much better. And I don't know, if I had a young child, I'd sue their asses because you're putting my young child in jeopardy.
Well, how do you cover the COVID story now? Because you've said everything you can possibly say to try to get people to take the vaccine. Now, we've seen some numbers change because the Delta variant's so vicious. But that's got to be a big part of your day if you're running the network right now to figure out possibly a new way to tell the story, isn't it?
Yeah, I don't think there is a new way to tell the story. I think it's important to be to not be conflicting with things you've said in the past. It's important to tell people the same story, not change it every night. I think they have to just keep going like they're going, and hope in the end that reason comes through. But I also would jump on this. I think it's not even a question of respecting the HIPAA rules and laws, which is what the Fox anchors are hiding behind when you ask them if they got a vaccine, or some politicians. I think when they open their mouths and they tell their constituents or their listeners not to do the vaccine, but that for their families and themselves even, they have taken the vaccine. Well, their viewers need to know that, because that helps you decide whether you're going to listen to the anchor or not. The vaccine is good enough for you, but not for me. So you'll protect your life, but you don't care if I protect mine or my children's.
So who do we put that on? The brothers Murdoch for allowing it to go forward that way?
Well, in the end, you put it on them because they own the store. But I just hope there's a price that these anchors have to pay.
Right.
I listened to Fox Primetime one night and listened to the litany of all these people coming out and trashing the vaccine. And I know for a fact that in a couple of the cases, they themselves have taken the vaccine.
Right.
So why don't you tell your viewers that so they can judge what you say better?
Would you tell your people to do that? To state that you've had the vaccine?
I think that on any story, it's a matter of coming clean.
Yeah, declare your participation, whatever that means.
So if you're going to report on the vaccine, you have to say, no, I've not taken the vaccine, and I think it's a bad idea, and I think it's a bad idea for these reasons, and that's why I would recommend that you not take the vaccine either, if you want to go that route. But for God's sakes, I wouldn't do one thing in private and tell my viewers to do something different, especially when it's life-threatening. I mean, Jesus, where is their sense of morality, integrity?
Right. Forget about looking in the mirror, looking at your family in the eyes. You got to look yourself in the mirror and understand that you're literally a part of killing people.
Yeah, I mean, one day I'll sit down with Tucker, who I have a great deal of affection for, and just sit there and say, "What were you thinking?"
Right. I'd love to know the answer to that. In regards to that question before, how do people know they're getting news versus opinion? There's been some talk about basically labeling opinion in a crawler at the bottom of the screen. Would that ever work?
No. Basically, the network set up rules, and if you're a decent network, you sit there and say, "Remember, we used to say the views expressed here are not the views of the state," right?
Right.
And they don't do that anymore.
So there's no way to do that with the technology we have now where it could make a difference?
Well, you could do it, but wouldn't it sound like you were undercutting your talent? Yeah,
well, there's the balance, right? What do you do?
See, the balance is you sit and say to your anchor, you can't do this. If you want to go ahead and take this position, you have to tell the people what you have done in this area. You want to trash the vaccine? Fine. But you tell the people whether you had the vaccine or not. Because that speaks volumes. Did you put it in your arm? If you put it in your arm voluntarily, and you're telling people not to put it in their arm, that's not right.
Yeah, I've referred to it on this podcast before with other guests talking about it, and I called it the mom rule. You have to tell me whether or not you helped your mom get to the place to get the vaccine. But we're talking about the same thing. Is it harder now to do journalism than it was when you were coming up and I was coming up?
No, but it's harder to make it count like it used to. And that's because so many people have broken the rules. First of all, there are so many bloody journalists and so many programs and so many opinions. And you sit there and you get lost in it. I mean, I get lost in it. It used to be easier when it was just a matter of saying, what do these three anchors have to say about it? But so from that standpoint, it's not harder to take a position. It's harder to make it count.
And where do you stand on cancel culture in the news? Because, again, we're talking about human beings bringing us the news. Do you have to constantly remind producers to remind shows that we can't be worried about that?
Well, you have to take every story
back to the one day at a time thing.
Exactly. And you have to decide, are these the stories that we're going to, what is the position of the network on this? Mm-hmm. And I would deal with all these people as individuals. I'd sit down with the anchors and find out what they think and what they do. More than what they think even is what they do. And it's both what they do in their personal lives that impacts the audience and what they tell the audience. And if there's a difference, if there's a disconnect there, I think the audience has a right to know.
What's the I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
What's the chicken and the egg in regards to the attention deficit disorder we all have now? Is the news ADD created by the way the shows are produced and broadcast, or do we not have the discipline or the attention to pay, so therefore the news has to be produced in the way it is now?
Well, I think the problem with the way the news is produced now is they assume the audience has no attention span.
Right.
They assume the audience can only accept things in small bits and pieces. We can spend a minute and a half on this, and after that we lose the audience. See, I think that's all bogus. I think the most successful shows out there now are things like, and for good reason, John Oliver, and even the opening monologue on Colbert. Mm-hmm. I mean, but take the John Oliver show. The best researched pieces I see are on John Oliver's program. And he says, when he does a deep dive, they really do a good, honest deep dive. And yes, they have fun, and yes, they tell jokes, and yes, they embarrass people. But the core facts in each of their presentations are straight on.
I believe
they're dead on.
Sure.
And there's no fake news on John Oliver.
No, absolutely not. And I believe that it's a parent and a family's responsibility to remind each other and certainly teach your kids to look for different viewpoints other than the ones you hear in this house or out of our mouths. And that was the beauty.
Well, there are courses, there are college courses. I teach at a number of universities, and you do a lot of your time is spent telling people how to get to the bottom of the story and how to decide what your opinion is going to be, and to be aware of what your opinion is. But it's also to be aware of what your responsibilities are to your audience once you have an opinion you want to share.
Is the pipeline that you see from college kids that you teach, work with, or have mentored or talked to, is the pipeline different now than it used to be? They're wide-eyed, idealistic journalists versus people that want to be TV stars?
Well, they all want to be TV stars.
And by the way, TV, we mean screens, period, not just regular TV.
Right. I still think you have people who are going in it for the wrong reasons, and it's an ego thing or it's a money thing or who knows what. I think that there's really brilliant kids in school who are studying this, and we'll see how it plays out when they get into the real world. But that's the thing, isn't it? When they get into the real world and they have to make a paycheck, what do they do? And how much do they sell out? How much do they keep in mind what they learned in school? And did they learn from good people? A lot of people teaching aren't very good.
And that's a huge problem. There's a million ways to stream entertainment. What about streaming news as a development now or in the future? Where's that going?
It's becoming a reality. Both, I think it's CBS and ABC. They're figuring out, they're learning that what they have to do is build news product that streams. And, the scheduled, dedicated newscasts that play according to time zones and all, I think it's going to be a thing of the past. I think news is one of those things that unless you're talking about, excuse me, a 60 Minutes or something, which is not strip news or breaking news but just smart news. If you're talking about breaking news, I think you have to watch a live presentation of it. I used to be amazed, at Nightline, when somebody saw our program some nights, it was 6 hours old, which means it wasn't even current in some cases, in many cases. So I think news is something that needs to be digested as close to the live moment as you can make it. And it changes so quickly. Look, you and I spoke this morning, and when we spoke, I think the first call we talked about, Cuomo hadn't quit yet. So if we did a show then, if we did this show then, you almost would have to throw it out and start over, because he's quit now. So we're not talking about, well, he ought to write it out, or he's attempting to delay the process, hoping for a better deal or a chance to make his case better or discredit the accusers more. In the same respect, dragging it out meant that more accusers would have an opportunity to come out, and his side of the story would be contested more. I just think streaming is the way you need to go with news, and I think that because of the strength of the digital components of Disney and CBS, I think that they are in a position to make that switch easier.
They are the leaders, or they'll be the leaders?
I think they'll be the leaders.
Okay.
Maybe NBC too. I don't know enough about what they're doing. But in what I see starting to formulate, it's not hard to keep these shows current. And I think a streaming product is going to be a more efficient, accurate, and more important product for us to have access to.
And it's amazing because the new way to do this is changing day by day, week by week. And obviously there'll be startups that get traction and some that don't.
But I think the major networks, have traction.
Yeah, right. And they're branded.
And they're branded. And, the people who are endangered are, you're not going to have just one anchor as prominent. You're going to have anchors who are willing to work on the air for hours.
Mm-hmm.
It becomes a really long day for these guys and girls. Men and women.
Sure, of course. I've got one more thing I want to ask you about, and then obviously if there's anything just in this general discussion, because you know how much I love talking to you, and I'm such as I said, a nerd for this stuff.
I love talking to you too. You have good subjects.
But I just think this is so important, and I don't want people to misunderstand how important the coverage of news is. And I worry about two things. I worry about local news, the lack of funding in local news, the newspapers going away. There's only one Washington Post and one New York Times. A great paper like the Chicago Tribune in this town where you and I both live is essentially gone. So with local news underfunded, hiring people that work cheaply who really aren't ready for prime time, and newspapers going away, what's your level of concern with local news?
Well, local news has always been, in my view, the most important product a local station has.
Mm-hmm.
Not just because it's the primary source of revenue for them, but because it's about, what happened next door to you, which is in some cases way more important than what happened across an ocean. You need to know what's going on in your own hood to be an informed citizen. And we know that there's a direct correlation between a healthy news product and a healthy democracy. A democracy to be running on all cylinders needs to have an informed public. And you don't have an informed public if you don't have a vibrant news media. So it's really important that attention, time, and money be spent in this area. I think that the streaming element of it, I think when you see the way I think ABC and CBS are redesigning the relationship between the network and local,
mm-hmm.
I think they're going to be attacking that and fixing that or preserving that. I'm hopeful.
How would you cover Trump now?
Sparingly. He's not the president. I don't need to know every tweet he makes.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you look at things that he does, and if it looks like it's getting a lot of attention, then you cover it. But you don't do what Jeff Zucker frankly did early on in the story and cover it. It was a smart production play, but not a great new journalistic play.
Mm-hmm.
He put everything Trump said on the air. Donald Trump got $2 billion worth of free advertising from CNN in the early days of his campaign. And I just don't think we want to go back to that. He's not the president, and it's questionable whether he's going to stay the leader of the traditional Republican Party, or is he just going to have his followers?
Yeah, I don't, you would need dental records to identify the Republican Party at this point, if in fact you could. It's nothing like the Republican Party I grew up in and around. And I think it's important to have a party that espouses traditional conservative views, not a Trump Republican Party, but a legitimate Republican Party. But I honestly don't know that that's ever going to happen again.
Well, it's going to be extraordinary because I remember I worked in the Senate for 6 months
mm-hmm.
for Gene McCarthy. We were a progressive, young, obviously Democratic left group.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember working on the floor of the Senate, and Everett Dirksen was in the Sentinel. And I used to, on a couple of occasions, I got to not have lunch with him, but be in the lunch with him. And I remember he mesmerized me because he was so bloody smart. and they were all so decent in so many ways. And you go there now, and you go into the Senate now, and there are people who are just ridiculous in what they do and the way they behave.
Mm-hmm.
Ted Cruz is an embarrassment.
100%.
And the minority leader in the House is an embarrassment.
He's a coward.
Yeah.
He's Kevin McCarthy. He's an absolute coward. And as I've said a million times, the job is not to get the job and keep the job. The job is to serve, and there's no interest in serving on any level. It's just about keeping the job and saying whatever they need to say.
He's trying to keep the job, and he thinks he's going to be the speaker.
Right.
I think if the Democrats lose the House, I think there's going to be a move to elect somebody other than him the speaker.
I said I would only ask you one more. I got to flip one thing, though. The messaging that comes out of the White House of the Biden administration, good so far or needs work?
Well, I think that, Joe's a really good guy, and I think they've done a really good job in so many areas. But I think that there are times when he doesn't exert enough leadership over his own party,
mm-hmm.
And he puts too much of his resources into, being nice, keeping bipartisan alive. I think you have to manage your own minority, majority. I think he needs to lead them better. I think he needs to give them clearer instructions. But it's a tough job, and I've never had to do it, never will have to do it. And by and large, I think he's done very well.
The conversation, the ongoing discussion of the media, what's happening, how important it is, will continue. Look, I love the fact that you teach kids, and you've done it throughout your career, and you can do anything you want with your career at this point. But boy, I'd love to have you back in the day-to-day game. So, well, I'd
kind of like to do that too. So I'm looking now that I live here in Chicago, I'm just kind of looking here now to see who would be interested.
I'm sure there's a good line going. Is there anything else you wanted to mention as regards to where we are right now that we missed?
No, I think, it's to be continued.
Yeah, it is. Yeah. And
you be well.
Thank you, my friend. I appreciate it. It's Rick Kaplan, and I'm happy to pass on an email question to Rick. It's thecochranshow@gmail.com. And thank you for doing this. It's a lot of time, and I appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. And if any of them have questions that you think I should answer, I will.
Thank you, sir.
You be well.
Are you purchasing a home, and are you tired of getting your offers declined? You need to do what I did. I called Team Hochberg, a trusted local lender who will always look out for your financial best interests. Your offers are being rejected because they didn't stand out from the other 10 or 20 that are sitting there. That's why you need to call Team Hochberg to learn about their 21-day close. Make your next offer stand out by telling the seller, Team Hochberg is originating your loan, and your loan will be closed 21 days later. 21 days within the home inspection time and attorney review, that clock will be ticking. And the bottom line is this: a cash offer is the only offer that's stronger than a Team Hochberg 21-day close. Team Hochberg helped me and thousands of my podcast listeners purchase homes within 21 days of the home inspection and attorney review. My son and daughter-in-law just did this. If it's good enough for them, I'm recommending it to you. But they can't help if you don't call 855-56-DAVID or go to 56david.com for more information about how to make your next offer stand out with the Team Hochberg 21-day close. Call 855-56-DAVID or visit 56david.com. That's 855-563-2843 or 56david.com for Homeside Financial, an equal housing lender, NMLS number 1124061. Remember, we always focus on a charity worth mentioning and worth bringing up, and some of them come from you. We try to tie them into the episode as well as we do today. But first, let me mention that if you have a charity you'd like me to promote, we do it for free on every episode here. Send me an email with the charitable details, yours and theirs, as in their website, any information you want me to know about you. It's thecochronshow@gmail.com. And, of course, you can email me about anything. But in regards to charities, they had a horrible year, as you can imagine, in 2020. Donations down. People were worried about their money. They're coming back this year, but they still need your help. And this time around, we're talking about the Committee to Protect Journalists, CPJ.org, a very, very highly rated nonprofit that promotes press freedom and protects the rights of journalists around the world to report the news without fear of punishment. That never used to be a big problem here, but as you heard Rick Kaplan discuss, there's always been threats from people about stories that have come up, restricting coverage, that type of thing. But it was third world and second world countries that you had to be concerned about, where journalists were literally being put in jail. Well, Trump and his friends tried that. The courts have shot it down. But the Committee to Protect Journalists, it's just as important in America now as it is in other places. So if you can help, and I hope you will, cpj.org. If you're an aspiring journalist, lots of resources there. And if you're a journalist who feels like you have gotten into trouble anywhere in the world that you're listening, and we're in many countries, I hope you'll check out cpj.org. And I thank you for checking out Live from my office. I appreciate it. First time, regular listener, whatever the case may be. Spread the word. Tell everybody. Live from my office on every podcast platform. Subscribe, like, rate, review, and you help us keep this going. And I enjoy bringing stuff to you, great guests, my views on things, and your views too. That's the other thing you can do when you email me is tell me what you think about a topic. You could end up on the show. CPJ.org, the Committee to Protect Journalists. Thank you, Rick Kaplan, and thank you, Ross Cochran, for, of course, putting this episode together, as he always does and always does so well. See you next time when we do it again on Live from my office.
30 years plus on the airwaves, you have turned your dial to me. Now you're tuned into my podcast. It's Live from my office, Steve. From Ithaca, New York to Carolina South, W. Cochran, Steve. From Minneapolis and then Chicago twice, top-rated shows achieved. Sit back, relax, and now listen to my show. When or wherever you are, 'cause you're on the go. A-list celebs with some laughs and great info. Live from my office, the Steve Cochran Podcast Show. Yeah, yeah, yeah. No better place to be. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Subscribe and like for free. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Live from my office, Steve. So glad you're with me. It's Live from my office, Steve.
Thank you for listening to Live from my office, a service of Monkey Run Productions. All rights reserved. The podcast is hosted by Steve Cochran, and it's mixed, edited, and produced by me, Ross Cochran. Steve is available for corporate speaking gigs. He would love to MC your event, and occasionally, he's funny. Thank you for listening. Head to cochranshow.com for more.